Hello everyone, my name is Thomas White and this is Thomas Writes. Today I'm going to be talking about Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein. I read this book for the first time back in college and recently reread it in 2022, so sorry that it took me so long to get this review up. I wanted to reread this book because, one, I had forgotten a lot about it and have had it sitting on my shelf for a long time, and two, there's a lot of people who view this book in a very negative light. It is very controversial in the science fiction community. Some people love it, some people hate it, some people claim it promotes fascism, while other people say it's a very patriotic book, and so I wanted to reread it and kind of get a fresh perspective on it. Another thing that makes this book controversial is that the famous movie Starship Troopers that is based on it is actually very loosely based on the book and satirizes the source material rather than really paying homage to it.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part too.
In a weird way, the movie has both promoted the book, but also, I believe, skewed people's perceptions of the book and what it's really about. So today, I want to talk about the book and why, frankly, spoiler alert, it's one of my favorite science fiction books. For those of you who have seen the movie, the premise of the book is the same. It is set in the distant future where Earth is at war with an alien race that they simply refer to as the Bugs, and the spearhead of Earth's military is the mobile infantry. They are men in these big power suits that are dropped onto alien worlds to fight the Bugs. And our protagonist is Johnny Rico, a young man fresh out of high school who joins the mobile infantry against his father's wishes. But from that basic premise, the book takes an entirely different direction from the movie. Paul Verhoeven, the director of Starship Troopers, flat out admitted that he read the first 2 chapters of the book and thought it was boring and bad. So that gives you an idea of how faithful the Starship Troopers movie is to the book. And to Paul Verhoeven's credit, it is surprising to most people when they read this book just how slow it is. You would think from the name Starship Troopers that this would just be an action-packed, schlocky, shoot-'em-up kind of book, but in reality, this book spends most of its time building up the world and introducing you to the characters, and there is actually very little action per se that takes place in the book. Robert Heinlein himself served in the United States Navy, and this book very much reads that he is trying to write a story from the perspective of a veteran and kind of give civilians an idea of what day-to-day life in the military really looks like. A lot of people accuse Starship Troopers of romanticizing war, but I think it actually gives a very realistic depiction of what life for a soldier looks like. Most of the time, soldiers who are in combat scenarios are not fighting. They're spending time doing drills, cleaning dishes, doing regular menial tasks, and when they are called into action, you see in the book that it's just complete chaos, that the biggest struggle for a soldier in combat, according to Heinlein, is for them to be able to remain focused on the objective and not get lost in just the absolute insanity that is going on around them. There are only 2 action scenes in the entire book, the first one being at the beginning and the second one being at the end, and they are described in a way that's very different from the way action scenes are typically described in modern books, because it's focused more on the tactics and the deployment and the logistics side of things rather than describing every single thing that takes place during the battle. It feels less personal and a bit more distant, which I get for some readers would be a turnoff, because I, like a lot of readers, do like my big, grand action spectacles where you see everything that the character is dealing with. But I can also respect Robert Heinlein for writing a book where warfare is treated more tactically and a bit more clinically, like it is in real-life history. And since I said there are only 2 battles in the book, you're probably wondering, what is the rest of the book talking about? And for most of the book, it's chronicling Johnny Rico as he goes through boot camp. You see his experiences in high school, you see his relationship with his family. It's getting you acquainted with the characters, but mostly with the world. One of the things that I think is very masterful about Starship Troopers is that it is a prime example of Heinlein's greatest strength as a writer, which is his indirect world building. One of the big problems with a lot of sci-fi books is that they tend to bog you down in exposition dumps that aren't really set up and don't make sense for the characters to be involved in. But Heinlein expertly skirts that problem by having Johnny Rico go to his history class in high school, where you as the audience get to see what the history of the world is, while also it is believable that the main character is getting this exposition because they're in a classroom. They're supposed to be learning about the history of their world. Something else that I think hinders people's enjoyment of this book is that it can come across as kind of preachy. It is no secret that this is Heinlein's anti-communist manifesto, if you will, because the bugs in here are described as being a hive-minded collective. You have characters flat out say that the government in this book is supposed to be anti-Marxist, and just a lot of other comments like that that are very clearly trying to make analogies for the Cold War, the Soviet Union, communism, so on and so forth. While some people may find that a bit too much, I think it is very interesting. To me, Starship Troopers is the embodiment of politics in the 1950s, where you are seeing the capitalist and communist argument really come to a head. You are seeing these discussions about what role should the military play in society, especially in a society that is on the brink of a potential world war. It is a very, very interesting discussion piece for that reason. Typically, when you think of stories about space marines that shoot giant bugs, you don't think of them as being very deep stories. And what fascinates me about Starship Troopers is that this is seen as kind of the origin point for the whole space marines shooting big aliens subgenre of science fiction. And yet, this book has so much political allegory attached to it. It has so many deep themes you can read into it. There are a lot of great discussions to be had on the role of the military in society. What does it mean to be a citizen of a country? What does it mean to be a man? All of those themes are very prominent in this book, and I think a lot of science fiction nowadays that does the whole Space Marines versus bugs thing doesn't understand how deep the original source material that inspired it really is. And as a reader, your investment in this book is going to depend a lot upon what you go into it looking for. If you're looking for a big action romp, shoot 'em up kind of book, this book is probably going to be boring to you. But if you are looking for something that's more of a political treatise than anything else, and a speculative fiction as to what the world may look like hundreds of years from now, I think you'll enjoy this book. Because this book is less about the characters, and it is more about the world building, the themes, and more of that aspect of the story. Johnny Rico is more of an audience avatar. He's our way to experience the world, to learn about the history, and understand the camaraderie between the people in the mobile infantry. And while some people may find the patriotic, hoorah kind of attitude a bit cheesy, I find it very endearing. I think it is very true to the kind of camaraderie that soldiers really do have when they are in combat scenarios and the kind of relationships that they develop with one another. On the more negative side of things, another aspect of this book that is criticized is the characterization of women. They are not so objectified as they are in something like Stranger in a Strange Land, but that objectification is still a bit there. Women are kind of seen as a prize for the men in this book. On the flip side, I think it is incredibly interesting that for a book written in the 1950s, Heinlein put women in such a prominent role in his futuristic version of the military. If you read the book, you find out that women are primarily selected to be pilots in this world because they are believed to have faster reflexes and are able to make quick decisions at a moment's notice. So while there is valid criticism to be had in how Heinlein portrays women, I also do think there needs to be some credit given to him for writing a book in the 50s about women having a prominent role in the military, because that was a very controversial stance for him to take in that era. And then, of course, the other big criticism of this book is the idea that it promotes fascism. And my take on that is, I don't think Heinlein was setting out to write a book that promoted fascism. If you look at the guy's life, if you look at his other books, all of the villains in his other books are always these big authoritarian characters, especially if you look at Stranger in the Strange Land, where the villain is basically this guy who runs a world government bent on taking away people's liberty. I don't think the guy was a fascist. Rather, I think what Heinlein was thinking was, I want to create a government that will deal with the problem of people being unpatriotic, with the problem of people not really understanding the cost of freedom, or really caring about their citizenship to their nation. I may go more in depth on that in a future video, but for now just know that I don't think this book promotes fascism, and at the very least, even if you do think it does, I think it represents a really great point for good discussions on the topics of patriotism, citizenship, and war. So at the end of the day, no matter how controversial this book may be, it is still one of my favorite science fiction books of all time. It is thematically rich, it is a great discussion piece on the politics of war, and it is a great contemplation of 1950s era America, with everything from the Cold War to the Red Scare, communism, fanatic patriotism. All of those are very prominent in this book. And I also just have to give this book credit for the fact that it spawned this whole subgenre of space marines fighting aliens that we see today, from stuff like Aliens by Ridley Scott and Halo. They all take direct inspiration from Starship Troopers. So at the end of the day, I'm gonna give this book 5 out of 5 stars. For me, this book is a classic, albeit a very misunderstood one, and I would love to hear from you in the comments as to your own thoughts on this book, and feel free to disagree with me. I know this book is very controversial, so don't be afraid to say if your opinion is different than mine. Also, sorry, I almost forgot, I will now add Starship Troopers to the book altar. The only one to stay up so far. Thank you guys again for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and comment down below on your own thoughts on Starship Troopers, as well as some of your all-time favorite science fiction books. Thank you guys again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.